Today's episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast is brought to you by Poor Richard's Cafe and Star Local Media. Poor Richard's Cafe, Plano's oldest restaurant since 1973. They are open daily from 5:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., serving the three most important meals of the day: breakfast, lunch, and dessert. It is true Texas home-style cooking made with love and grit. That is Poor Richard's Cafe, located off of Avenue K in Plano. Welcome to another episode of the Star Local Media High School Sports Podcast. My name is Matt Welch, being joined by Taylor Raglin and Devin Hasson. Let's see, it is Monday, the 1st of July, and with the start of July, that means a tried and true tradition around the sports department, and that is another edition of the Varsitys, our high school sports awards that we've been doing now for, I guess, this is the 7th year. It is basically our little high school sports spin on the ESPYs. The ESPYs has their big award ceremony in the middle of July, so we decided to just, let's kind of take that same concept and let's recognize some of these standout athletes, coaches, teams, just moments period from, I guess, the last year of high school sports coverage. Now, as has been the case for several years, we split this up into three parts, 3 awards for each part, so 9 awards total. The first part is best game, breakthrough athlete, and just the biggest story from each market throughout the 2018-19 high school sports year. So we're going to take, and this will be the case for the next, I guess, the next 3 episodes of the podcast. On Monday, at least, we'll take one award from that week's installment of the Varsitys and just kind of discuss the thought process that went into how we arrived at the selection for each of our markets. Now, last year we did breakthrough athlete for this first edition. So we're going to switch things up. We're going to talk best game and what were our selections for best game. Just throughout the school year. I mean, we covered games 2 nights a week, sometimes 3-4.
I got a whole year this year.
Yeah.
Last year I only had a couple months to draw from. I got a whole season.
And we did that for 9-10 months. So obviously plenty of worthy selections to pick from each of our markets. So Devin, let's start with you, man. Just whether it was Rowlett or Mesquite, what did you arrive on as far as your pick for best game in 2018-19?
And I actually had this conversation even before we started kind of putting together our Varsitys about a month ago. Somebody asked me what was the best game you saw all season. And there was a couple that kind of jumped out. Mesquite kicking a last-second field goal to beat Horn. It was kind of a signature win of their season. Rowlett Saxey girls soccer was one of the best games I saw in terms of just what was on the line. That was for the district championship. It was just a back-and-forth game. But like I told that person I was talking to, the one thing I keep going back to, and I know I'm supposed to pick a game that my team wins, my team I cover wins, but Poteet and John Tyler football was the one that just keeps coming back to my mind. It was for the 7-5A Division I championship. Everybody kind of knew that those two teams were the ones to beat. They kind of figured they were going to be undefeated coming in, and they were. And it just really lived up to the hype, and you can't say that about a lot of games that come down for a district championship. Didn't start off that way. John Tyler jumps out 21-0 in the first quarter. I mean, it's like Poteet just decided not to play, but they started getting things going in the second quarter. They scored twice to get back to 21-15. John Tyler goes back up. They get a touchdown right before halftime. Devlin Woods, their quarterback, to Keandre Street. And I'll come back to them later because that was a nightmare matchup for Poteet all night long. So John Tyler's up 29-15 at half. Poteet keeps trying. They keep chipping away, but John Tyler answers him. You think it's pretty much done. John Tyler goes up with about 6.5 minutes left in the game, 41-29. And you think, okay, well, does Poteet have it in him? Well, Poteet comes right back down and scores. Seth McGowan is able to score from 2 yards out to make it a 1-score game, but can they get that stop? They haven't been able to get that crucial stop all game long. They do it. On 4th down, they hold right near midfield. Still work to be done. There's a couple minutes left. On 3rd and 10, Dalton Dale finds Cam Lampkin for a 50-yard completion down to the 2. The very next play, Seth McGowan plows in for his 4th touchdown of the game from 2 yards out. And there it is. There's the miracle. 44-41, 15 seconds left. 15 seconds left was enough time. And, John Tyler, to their credit, they get down near midfield. Seth McGowan actually came in on defense as a defensive end and sacked Devlin Woods on 3rd down. and you thought that was it. And there was some discussion. Poteet thought the game was over. They were on the field celebrating. Officials ruled, no. 1 second left. 1 second left.
It's always a bad sign. It feels like.
It's just bad juju. And again, that 1 second was all it took. I mentioned Devlin Woods to Keandre Street. Keandre Street had over 215 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns, and the 4th touchdown was the one on a Hail Mary as time expired that Poteet had well defended. I mean, I had the video to go in. You see a sea of Poteet guys in the end zone. They're ready to defend it. But Keandre Street, they couldn't solve him all night long. They couldn't solve him in that last game. He goes up, gets it, and there it is, 48-44. But just like I say, it's one of those games that doesn't just stick in your mind for this game. I mean, I'll remember this game 20 years from now.
Right.
It's just one of those just incredible games. Sorry, Poteet fans, I'm not trying to bring up bad memories or anything like that.
I'm going to do the same thing to Allen football in a few moments.
But it really was just one of those memorable games.
I do feel like, if the game has because I mean, the finish is always the thing that kind of sticks in your mind the most. If you have a game that has just this a highlight reel finish, the types of which you just don't see all too often, that's kind of what puts a lot of these games over the top as far as just their staying power and really and just the merit of something like the best game that you saw over the course of the year. And that's kind of where I arrived with Lake Dallas and what the boys soccer team was able to do in their first round matchup against Saginaw. The kind of finish that I'm not sure I'll ever see that again.
Yeah.
No matter whether it's watching high school, whether it's if I ever decide to watch an EPL game or a FC Dallas game or whatnot, just the sheer odds of a finish like what Lake Dallas had against Saginaw it's a needle in a haystack type of scenario. It is crazy to think now in hindsight, like what they were able to accomplish from that. Like a team that went on to the regional finals, they were mere seconds away from going one and done. I mean, so Lake Dallas was down to Saginaw 2-1, inside the final minute of the match. And this is a Lake Dallas team that had won its first ever district championship, coming off a great regular season, really seemed primed to make a deep run. And then, I mean, it's like I said, just on the absolute doorstep of getting bounced in the first round. And then I'll never forget the sequence. Brock Pope, sends a ball into the box. The Saginaw keeper saves it, and then a skirmish ensues, and Lake Dallas is awarded a PK inside the final minute. Now trailing 2-1.
Inside the final 15 seconds, right?
Something, yes, very very close. Yeah. So Carlos Zamora, he takes the PK. The keeper guesses right, bats it away, but obviously the ball's still in play. Zamora runs up and then boots in the rebound for the goal to tie it up with like 15 seconds left, sends the game into overtime, and just an absolute heart-stopping equalizer. And then you get to overtime, and you think maybe Lake Dallas can feed off of that momentum and find that game winner. And it doesn't come, in the first 10 minutes. It looks like it's not going to come in the second 10 minutes, and it looks like a PK shootout is inevitable. And then they just lob a perfect ball over the top of the defense to Anthony Patty, who's just right there in the clear, wasn't offsides or anything like that, and he just goes in, boots the game winner with, again, like 10 seconds left in the second overtime. And just like that, I mean, just the fact that you get not just one goal inside the final 15 seconds, but 2 goals, one in regulation, one in overtime. I mean, just what an incredible finish. And I mean, just to see what Lake Dallas was able to do in building off of that.
They kept doing it too. And Patty especially. They kept doing it. I mean, there were plenty of candidates for my game of the year for Lake Dallas that were soccer as well, but none of them topped what you saw. It was nuts. Where
did you arrive though for your Lake City's game of the year?
Kind of like Devin, I had a football game that came down to the wire, and that was non-competitive, I guess, for a little bit, to put it nicely. It was Lovejoy's homecoming, actually. Lake Dallas went to Lovejoy for their homecoming game, and I believe Lovejoy got out to a 28-0 first half lead, and it just looked like, why are we even playing the second half? I mean, Lake Dallas couldn't do anything on offense. Ryan Deverschmidt, typically so good. I mean, they were barely getting past midfield. They weren't doing anything. And Lovejoy was just rolling, dominating, really good on defense. And then all of a sudden it just completely flipped. Lake Dallas scored a couple times in the first half. I don't remember exactly the halftime deficit, but it was still a score or two, and they had some life. But you figured that, okay, going into half, Lovejoy makes more adjustments, come back out. Jahi Rainey looked like he couldn't be stopped. Carson Collins was throwing the ball really well. They'll figure it out. They'll kind of go back and forth, but 28-0 is a big enough lead, right? And it proved to be but by the slimmest of margins. Lake Dallas comes back, rumbles all the way back with Lovejoy scoring, I believe, 3 points to Lake Dallas's, multiple 4 touchdowns to get within 3 points. The roles just completely reversed, and then like you guys said, it's always the finish that you remember. So, Lake Dallas, a touchdown wins it. After an Anthony Petty field goal, I believe, with 8 minutes in the fourth quarter that got him close, got him within 1 score. Lake Dallas gets the ball back, gets down to, I believe, the Lovejoy close, like the 18, and that's plenty close for Ryan Depperschmidt and Kylie Smith and Brandon Ingle and that Lake Dallas offense, that was so explosive last year. And on the very last play, it just wasn't meant to be. Lovejoy, Sean Sumner's gets a sack. The place goes crazy. Great homecoming finish for him, for the Leopards in general. Ended up being, it's memorable because of how strange that game was. And I think I said as much in the written portion of the Varsitys. It's memorable not just because it was a close game and because of the finish, but just because of how strange it was that Lovejoy was completely unstoppable. Out to a 28-0 lead. Just looked like it was over before it even began, and then all of a sudden, now it's down to a final play when it had no business being that close. So it was a strange one. It was a fun one. The final play was fun, obviously, and the homecoming, I guess, kind of puts the cherry on top. It was a crazy night.
Devin, you mentioned not wanting to hurt anybody's feelings by picking a game that one of your schools lost, and I had to do that, unfortunately, for Allen and their football team. It is odd, to pick this game, considering it's their 3rd loss since October of 2012.
Yeah, ridiculous.
But there's just no getting. But and there were some worthy contenders for this as far as the best game that I saw, at least out of at the Allen part of my coverage. From Allen and Rockwall football in the second round, and just the fear of God that Jackson and Jacob Smith, Jacob Clark, and Rockwall put into Allen in the second round of their playoff run, to Allen girls basketball against Pflugerville Hendrickson in the regional semifinals, and them withstanding 40 points from Michaela Woods and Hendrickson with just an absolute nuclear performance by the Allen offense, and Nia Green and some of their just lights out shooters. But ultimately, though, I had to settle on Allen and Duncanville football. Man, it was one of the most anticipated football games all of last season. A game that when the season started and you're just kind of looking through the regions, those were the odds-on favorites to make it out of their respective regions and square off in the state semifinals. And then as you get closer with each week, just the buzz is building because Duncanville is building this historical season with their defense and just some of the gaudy numbers they were putting up. How will it fare, though, against an Allen team that is the most credentialed high school football team in the state right now, with just the run that they've been on with 5 state championships since 2008, just the kind of run that you just don't see out of any high school football program at the highest level of UIL.
6A, certainly not there.
So, so just to have that irresistible force and the immovable object square off in the state semifinals, and man, that game lived up to the hype and then some, it was looking like for a while, though, that it wasn't going to, because this was a game that Allen was down by 21 points at the half, something that you just never associate with Allen. Although that is kind of you look at their losses to Austin Westlake and to the Woodlands, that is kind of a running theme in which they have a really slow start before having to make a really huge push in the second half. They were just blindsided by that speed that Duncanville had. Tristan Smith scores on a 70-80 yard touchdown just 18 seconds into the ball game, draws first blood. Just some of the big plays. You just don't see Allen hit with those kinds of chunk plays. And yeah, they were in really, really uncharted waters there at halftime. And then credit to them for coming out of the half, going into a third quarter where Duncanville hadn't allowed a single point all season, and Allen somehow rips off 21 unanswered points in the third quarter alone, and we're tied 35-35 heading into the fourth quarter. You couldn't ask for any better theater than that for a game of that magnitude. And then you're thinking that, Allen's got all the momentum on their side. Obviously, you got to remember, Duncanville had a historic defense last season, and that group just mustered up. I think they got 2 stops before the Duncanville's offense finally broke through with Jaquindon Jackson scoring on a 40-yard touchdown run on 4th and 2, I believe it was, with about 3:02 left in the fourth quarter to put them up 7-42-35 on the following series. Duncanville defensive lineman Braylon Caitlin Carroll sacks Grant Tisdale in the end zone for a safety, and that was all she wrote. I mean, just a hell of a near comeback by Allen, and Duncanville though showing its the kind of fortitude that you weren't really sure, because that was a team that, I mean, Duncanville just had their way with everybody, it felt like, up until that round. So I mean, just for them to persevere in a moment like that, when you have Allen. I mean, the Allen juggernaut, a team that just is. I mean, they've been through this stage so many times before, and they are just so used to owning second halves of these games. So for Duncanville to show that kind of resolve was very, very impressive in the moments. Obviously not for the Allen fans that are listening to this, a sore spot, but still, I mean, still another terrific year for Allen, going to the state semifinals for the 7th straight year.
Yeah, poor Allen. we all feel bad for him.
How will they recover?
No one's going to be shedding any tears for Allen, who again is, just the third loss that Allen's had over the last 7 years.
Yeah.
Just the ungodly run that they're on right now. But yes, that was the best game that I saw, a game that lived up to the hype and then some. You mentioned a Rowlett Saxey, quality matchup in girls soccer, was it? Was that also a game that was in consideration for you as far as the overall?
Yeah, and typically over in that district, the Garland IC district, it all comes down to Rowlett and Saxey.
Yeah.
They're the two best all-around programs. They're generally competing. When they meet head-to-head, it's a rivalry. They're close. They're neighbors. A lot of kids that go to Saxey live in Rowlett. These kids grow up together, and they're the two best teams in JISD. So it's always something a little bit extra when they meet, because it's a rivalry game, but also because the stakes are usually higher, because there usually are district championships on the line. Some of those games didn't really materialize this year. They came down to the district championship in football was supposed to be between those two, and they came in undefeated, and or within a game of each other, and then Saxey went in 48-0. And one of the biggest anomalies that you'll ever see. But that girls soccer game I mentioned, it was just, Saxey's had a stranglehold in girls soccer. They'd won 6 straight district championships coming into this season. Rowlett has been right there, right there on their heels. They shared their district title 2 years ago, or last year I should say. And, Rowlett led all season long. They do the point system for the first time this year in 10-6A. So Rowlett had that little 1 or 2 point cushion that they held all season long. And, of course, as fate would have it, they play in the final day of the regular season. So Rowlett's leading by 1 point in the standings. And so, and there's a good crowd. Soccer is kind of hit or miss as far as the tennis goes. The weather's sometimes bad. It's cold. It's whatever. But, they had a great crowd because it's these two teams. They knew it was at stake. And they really kind of lived up to the billing out there at Rowlett. Their home crowd was pumped. Saxey comes out and scores twice in the first 12 minutes. And you think, okay, Saxey's still Saxey's game to beat. And Rowlett didn't do anything for the first 25 minutes, and then they finally get a chance, and they capitalize on it. And it just kind of, the crowd getting back into it. The sideline was pumped up. It's 2-1, and then their activity really picked up on both sides. Both teams really elevated their level of play. A lot of quality chances on both ends, but the score remains the same until late in the second half. And Taylor Conway, who's Rowlett's outstanding sophomore, about to be a junior, but sophomore forward, one of the top scorers in the area. They've been trying to get her free, trying to get her the ball in space all game long. And Saxey just, they blanketed her. And she finally got a chance. She finally got the ball in space, and she did what Taylor Conway does. She beat a defender, beat the keeper. All of a sudden, it's 2-2 with 7 minutes left. And Rowlett, you can see it on the sideline. They have the momentum. They've overcome a 2-0 deficit. They're going to win this district championship. And takes Saxey about 1:05 to respond. Is Chase Thorne, who really was not one of their top scorers, but like Kristen Campbell told me after the game, she's like, she just comes up with some miraculous goals sometimes. She just finds a way that's just unexpected, and she buries a shot from 30 yards out, and again out of nowhere basically. And now all of a sudden Saxey's up 3-2 with 5 minutes left, and they're able to. Rowlett did mount a late charge, but couldn't get the equalizer. But it was just like I say, soccer matches are kind of hit or miss in terms of, most people, if they're going to pick a game of the year, it goes to a shootout, or it goes 12 rounds deep in a shootout type stuff. But I just thought, given the magnitude with a district championship on the line, given the fact that it's the two best rivals in Garland ISD, and just the fact that it kind of did live up to the hype, it was a really enjoyable game to watch.
I do love that aspect of how those two have their district schedules aligned to where they always see each other during that last part of the round robin, because more times than not, these district championships do boil down to whoever's rolling between Saxe and Rowlett. I almost arrived on an Allen girls basketball game as my pick for best game out of Allen. I know you did though, Taylor. So another thrilling chapter from their best ever playoff run. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, the historic run and almost came to an end at the hands of Saxe and the regional quarterfinals. To make the first ever regional tournament, they had to go through Saxe. Obviously, some history. Allen had some success in the regular season, but Saxe in the playoffs
Those games are early in the season,
is a different beast, and I think everybody, I don't know if everybody admitted it or not, but I think everybody kind of leaned towards Saxe. Even though Allen had that run, they were playing so well. Obviously they had Naya, they had talent, but everybody kind of felt like it's at the Colville Center. It's Saxe in the playoffs. This could be Saxe's time to really kind of make a run after a couple disappointing playoff runs. But it looked that way. With just over 11 seconds left in the game, I'll go right to the exciting finishes that we've been talking about. Just over 11 seconds, Avery Krause lays one in. Saxe's up 49-48. You get one possession if you're Allen, and it just felt like Saxe's going to do it. Saxe's going to hold them off after a crazy back and forth, exciting game. Avery Krause, perfect story. Going out on top, and this is awesome. And then all of a sudden, they come down. Tyler Jackson misses for Allen, and then it's like, okay, really, they missed. That was their shot. You got the ball in the hands of somebody that you wanted. It bounces around, and little Sydney Adams is just waiting right there. The smallest player on the court by far. I think maybe the smallest player on either roster. I'm not positive about that, but little senior Sydney Adams, it comes right to her. She immediately just throws it up right off the backboard and in. And I think the collective mood was kind of shocked. I mean, she knew what she did, and Allen was going crazy, but everybody else was just kind of like, what just happened? That was her first bucket of the game. That was her only score. And she lives, she called it the senior dream. To make that shot, obviously for Allen, it sent them to their first ever regional tournament. Turns into their first ever state tournament appearance. So lots of good games in that run. You mentioned the Hendrickson game. Lots of moments that'll stand out. But for me, covering that one, just the way it ended, the swings and momentum, Saxe looking like they had done it and kind of advanced on a last final seconds bucket of their own, and then all of a sudden Sydney Adams comes up with that moment. It was awesome. It was cool to see how excited she was, obviously, to be able to give Allen that moment, and that was definitely, it's one of those games, you don't necessarily think about the Varsitys all year, but it was one of those, I know I'm going to write about my best game at some point, and that's going to be it. It's not going to be topped. And
it was funny because people were following you on Twitter and text updates. I was at the Saxe Jesuit boys basketball playoff game, and Avery Krause's father is assistant coach for the boys team, so he's following along on it, and I can see his reactions down on as he's getting updates, and they were behind, and they came back, and they finally came back all the way and got the lead, and then you could see, I didn't even have to check Twitter, I didn't have to see anything.
You're just gauging his body language.
And you could just see, he went to the end of the bench and just did this number, and I said, oh, well, Saxe must have lost. And then, of course, I see you on Twitter, you come up with the last second shot, and I was like, oh, wow, what a heartbreaker, but what a great game also.
And there wasn't a timeout called after the Krause bucket. Allen back down.
It was crazy.
Do you remember if that, I guess I've been fascinated to know, in hindsight, if Teresa Durham had a timeout at the time or not, because there is that is kind of like a tactical question that you often have at the end of basketball games. Do you call a timeout and set something up, or do you try just to bank on just the chaos of transition, and that if you just go right back down, that you'll be able to catch them, out of rotation quick enough to get off a decent shot before time expires? And obviously couldn't have worked out any better for Allen.
They got a good look in the first place, if I remember right. I can't remember exactly what Tyler Jackson's shot looked like, but it wasn't. I don't think it was a terrible look, and then it didn't go in, and that was kind of, it was just all in one motion. It was like, oh my God, and it was crazy.
Let's see. Let's round this out with our Taylor. You and I, our picks for Plano.
Yeah.
The two best games that we saw in Plano. For me, this was one that I had a feeling this was going to be my pick before the game was even played, before the football season even started. Because as I'm plotting through, okay, this is probably what my tentative schedule is going to look like. September 28th, Prestonwood Christian and Houston St. Pius, the rematch from the state championship game the year before in TAPS. Ironically enough, my game of the year pick the year before.
Running back.
Yeah, it was just an absolute, just thrilling game where Prestonwood overcame an 18-point deficit in the second half, won by 1 point, just some incredible theater, and they brought back a lot of the same pieces for a rematch in non-district play, so obviously we're close to the same stakes, but nevertheless some bragging rights between what was perceived at the time as two of the top teams and taps for last season. And I mean, it's insane to think of just how high a bar that first meeting between them set, and to think that the rematch either met or exceeded.
Yep.
I mean, just wow. This game was, it was a fantasy football fan's just a dream. You had 105 total points, almost 1,100 yards of total offense between these two teams. And ironically enough, some callbacks to that first matchup, because the roles were kind of reversed, because it was Prestonwood that was just rolling them, early on in the game, and I believe they had a double-digit lead, for much of the second half, and then St. Pius makes a furious charge, and then they end up, overcoming a 16-point deficit in the second half, and they take a 48-44 lead with 2:39 left in the ball game in the fourth quarter. And you're thinking, wow, what a perfect measure of redemption. Obviously, nothing can entirely replace losing a state championship, but as far as getting a nice little measure of redemption, just how sweet it would have been for St. Pius to not only be able to overcome the same circumstance that they fell victim to 1 year prior, but to do so in Prestonwood's home field would certainly make driving those 4 hours north at least a bit more worthwhile. 2:39 is just a little bit too long, though. Prestonwood mounts a last minute charge. Quarterback Dylan Cadwallader, who was in his first year with the program, transferred over from Frisco Wakeland. He stages a game-winning drive, and he scores with, I believe, 19 seconds left on a 4-yard run. And Prestonwood ends up going on to win that game 57-48. There was a late defensive score or whatever that made it
Right.
a 2-score game. It wasn't a 2-score game. Yeah, it wasn't a 2-score game. So just a thrilling finish. You had, two of the two best quarterbacks in TAPS last year, with Dylan Cadwallader for Prestonwood and Grant Gunnell, nationally acclaimed prospect with St. Pius. They just lit it up. You had both of them combined for 6 touchdowns apiece in that game. Cadwallader threw for 438 yards, Gunnell for 506. It was so much fun to watch this game, and just an absolute blast to cover. Taylor, how about you, man? Let's close out the first half with your pick for game of the year out of your Plano coverage.
Yeah, another great finish. That's kind of for me what defines best game, because that's, like we've said so many times already on this podcast, that's what you remember. But this one also had controversy, which helps. You like to see some controversy. It had some great fan bases, had some elite talent. I'm going to go with Plano West and Rockwall in the boys basketball playoffs, the area round. Ended up being a Rockwall win 57-56, which, those of us that followed Plano West all year and know that program a little bit, they kick it up in the playoffs. They were playing well. They have some top-level talent, Ryan Zambi, Dalen Miner, guys like that. But at the same time, Rockwall, Samuel Williamson, the best player on the court, no doubt.
The best in the state.
In that game. We kind of figured that Plano West would hang around and maybe lose by 5 or 10 was kind of what I felt like I expected out of that game. And instead, we got an absolute thriller. To cut to the finish, it was, I believe, 57-54 Rockwall. Dalen Miner gets a layup. They get the ball back for a final possession, down 1. They go down the floor. Dalen Miner, running the point like he always does, had a fantastic career for West, finds Chase Ross in the corner, and this is where the controversy ensues, because Chase Ross tries to get a potential game winner up. It's deflected. The Rockwall defense really in his face. Some contact, I guess. I don't know if the refs were afraid to blow the whistle, or if they genuinely thought that they didn't see anything, worthy of calling a foul. But the shot goes awry. Not even close. Rockwall ends up hanging on for the 57-56 win. But yes, Plano West people were at that game. That was a foul. I assume they would to a person tell you that he was fouled. But
I expect nothing less.
Still a great matchup. A really fun second round game, especially one of those second round games where you're like, man, it's a bummer that one of these teams isn't going to play in the regional tournament, because it was a lot of fun. There were a lot of talent. Plano West will certainly be back. They bring back a ton. A positive, step, I think, for that program. And some of the young guys. But yeah, just the finish and the controversy, the fan bases, like I mentioned, it was at Lovejoy, so not a huge gym. It was packed, it was loud, it was raucous the whole time, it was back and forth. So it was a fun one with again, a crazy, controversial ending, and it stood out for sure.
We've still got, I guess, 2 more reporters to swing by and give their picks for best game from their respective markets. So we'll do a quick line change, bring on Bryan Murphy and Kendrick Johnson. And we'll pick that up in just a moment after a word from the sponsor. Today's podcast is brought to you by Star Local Media. 14 newspapers and websites with a print distribution of 270,000 homes and monthly page views of 600,000 online. Star Local Media, your community voice for news. And now, let's get back to the podcast. All right, let's close out this episode of the podcast as we continue our discussion of our best game selections for the latest installment of the Varsitys. We've got Bryan Murphy and Kendrick Johnson in the house to talk a little McKinney, a little Frisco, Little Elm, Celina, what have you. Bryan, you got a lot of selections to make for best game with all your markets. So whether it's Frisco, Little Elm, Celina, Prosper, where did you land for at least one of those markets?
We talked about it a little bit on the podcast a few shows ago. I brought up that Celina-Argyle football playoff matchup, that third-round matchup, and how there was a lot of smack talk going around for a team that was fresh off a 40-point whooping.
An eerie confidence emanating from Celina.
And they knew what they were doing with some of the stuff they were saying and some of the stuff Coach Elliott was telling me earlier in the week leading up to that playoff game. They lost 63-21 like 4 weeks before that. And I heard it could have been a lot worse if they hadn't called off the dogs. And, Argyle's Argyle. They're good at everything, especially football. Heavy favorite, state ranked. And then they're going into this showdown. It's with Celina, and, they're like, hey, we squeaked by in our first 2 playoff games. We have nothing to lose. Celina's Celina. They're a football powerhouse, but still, they weren't Celina last year, to their standards. And they came into that game with the utmost confidence, the most confidence in the world, and they had a chance to beat Argyle. And I was at that game. I'm trying to think. Yeah, I was at C.H. Collins Athletics Complex in Denton. Great facility there. It was a packed house. And I'm watching this game. Celina's up 22-19 with a couple minutes left in the fourth quarter. And I'm like, man, Celina's really going to do it. They threw the go-ahead touchdown to Brady Cunningham, a freshman, in the back of the end zone with a little over 2 minutes left in the game. I'm like sitting there. Everyone in the press box is kind of on their heels a little bit. Is Celina really about to beat Argyle in the third round of the playoffs after losing by 40+ a few weeks before? But Argyle with Bo Hogboom and that crew there with the Argyle Eagles, they march right down, throw a 28-yard touchdown pass, 25 seconds left or something. Defender slipped. Was there a push-off? Depending on what city you're in, they'll tell you it was either a slip or it was a push-off, but nothing was called. 28-yard touchdown.
What was your take? That you're neutral. You're Switzerland.
It was definitely offensive pass interference on it. No, I'm just kidding. It was
Celina. That's him.
No, I got Celina's back. No, it was too close to call. I mean, obviously, I don't. Up in the press box, you can't tell. Was it
a good no call?
Yeah, it was a good no call. It was
playoffs.
The better team won. In all seriousness, Argyle was the most.
They didn't they?
No, lost the following round, I think, to La Vega or something.
Yes, yeah.
They steamrolled everybody.
Yeah, Wake La Vega was good. But yeah, then the touchdown, 25 seconds left, they go on to win 26-22. Like I said, the better team won. But heck of a game.
Just crazy though in hindsight when you think of Celina calling their shot and poking the bear, and everybody outside of that program was like, "What are you doing, Celina?"
Dude, I tweeted that link, and I
just got routed by this team like a month prior. What are you doing?
I put the most important quote saying it's not word for word off the top of my head. I don't remember, but this is the gist of it. Coach Elliott said something about Argyle doesn't know how we play in the playoffs because they had never really matched up in the playoffs. And so I even attached that in my story link on my tweet. And man, you had Step, all the people from the DRC, Brady Keene, all these just guys from literally all over Texas were just replying to Tep. They were all like, "What is Celina doing? Are they Coach Elliott?" And man, when I saw Coach Elliott after the game, Celina, they were visibly upset. After the game, they felt like they should have beat them. Mm-hmm. And I talked to a couple players, and off the record, I was chatting with them before I talked to Coach Elliott, and he was like, "Man, Murph, we had them. We had them, and I was like, I know, man, y'all had them. Y'all should have won.
That's the concept out there. Me and Matt talked about, like in certain sports, like football, it's hard to be a team twice. Basketball, it's hard to be a team 3 times.
Yeah.
Volleyball's a sport, it's hard to be a person 3 times. So they had that going for them, and they had that. I guess I won't call it that mojo because that's
they had the Celina time. That's a thing.
They protect,
like, whether you can see it or
weird
not.
mystical power that Celina conjures in the playoffs.
It's like a ghost. I mean, it's there. You can't see it, but you can. I don't know. It's a weird thing, but it's definitely a thing in Celina, and it was in full effect.
And it almost worked.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Kendrick, where did you land for your best game to emanate from McKinney?
Mine's wasn't even. It had playoff implications, but it wasn't. I won't call it marquee sport. It was girls volleyball between Boyd and McKinney High. McKinney High had steamrolled, basically embarrassed Boyd early in the year. They had already clinched their playoffs. Surprisingly, nobody picked them to be in like the top 6, let's know, in the playoffs. So they're in the catbird seat, but they wanted to get Boyd out and keep them out the playoffs to put a cherry on top. They would have swept Boyd for the first time since they started playing in district, and they had them. They were up 2-1. Boyd comes back. They go to a 5-setter, and it's like 20-18. And a girl, Sydney Holcomb, who transferred, like it's either I think after her sophomore year to McKinney. From McKinney to Boyd, had 2 aces in a row to give Boyd a play-in game against McKinney or against Plano, which they would go on and play and go to another 5-setter.
Yeah, you could have picked either one of those games.
Either one of those games, and it was basically the same score, but it was reversed, and it kept them out the playoffs. But I've never seen that much dramatic with volleyball going down.
It's surprising, just in hindsight, when you think back to like that Boyd team and all the momentum that matchup against McKinney had to give them in getting that win and going.
It was a lot of emotion. They were emotionally spent. Like some girls, like they were upset they didn't make the playoffs. Not to be funny, they couldn't cry because they had like gave everything. Like they want E, they want fumes. And I've never seen a team like McKinney that played their hearts out, that was going to the playoffs but was upset. You would think they had got eliminated from the playoffs because they wanted to end that bad. And it was at Boyd, so that would have been like a program statement, like we're back. They were for real.
Yeah, it was all too fitting too, just because of what that rivalry means to McKinney ISD, just to the entire community. I'm sure that the atmosphere for that game was awesome.
sold out gym.
Oh yeah,
it was more people at that volleyball game that ended up being at their basketball game. Yeah. That's how crazy that was.
I believe it, man. I've covered only a small handful of volleyball games at McKinney Boyd, but man, they always show out well.
Yeah, Red Nation. Another thing too that like with this rivalry, it doesn't matter what sport. Like you literally throw the record to outs. I've seen one of the teams like at the bottom of 9-6A, and all of a sudden the other teams in the playoffs was like, why is this game competitive?
Let's see, Brian, be it Frisco or Little Elm, what was one of your picks for best game from either of those two markets?
Let me kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Go for it.
Frisco Lone Star, a lot of the students that attend Lone Star are from Little Elm. And Lone Star also happened to play in a lot of nail biters, sticking with football. You know, they lost 10-7 to Highland Park. They won 10-7 the next week against Little Elm. You know, those weird low-scoring games. We talked a lot about how good Lone Star's defense was, and how they were playing these weird nail biters.
Like 13-7 or something.
Yeah. So they played back-to-back 10-7 games. They beat Wakeland 14-0, and then they run into the Colony. A team JT was telling me about, prior to the season, they're going to beat Lone Star. They're better than Lone Star. They're going to finish district champions in 5-5A Division I, and man, what a game. It was another one of those weird games.
At a weird field?
At Toyota Stadium with no hash marks, no yard markers on the field at all. You couldn't see anything.
Take it back to Saturday YMCA football.
Seriously, man. It was like, I think he's on the 27th.
How do you keep stats for a game like that?
You don't. No, I remember I'd be keeping up with it, or I'd be tweeting. I'm like, yeah, he's at the 12?
27 or the 20? I don't know.
He made a play. I don't know. He made, but yeah, and then obviously Bronco, the good old hook and ladder play to win the game, and literally in the final seconds, no time left on the clock for the Colony. Lone Star had just tied it up 14-14. Like I said, it was another one of those weird low-scoring games. Most of high school football, it's not weird to see a 49-38 game, stuff like that. We see it all the time. 50.
Anything under 20 is considered low score.
Exactly. And so the fact that Lone Star had given up 21 points to anyone was a shock, because they, like I said, they just shut out Wakeland. They had just kept Little to 7 points. They just had Highland Park to 10 points, and they were just dominating teams defensively, suffocating them, and they were holding the Colony in check. Miles Price and Keith Miller and those guys, they weren't, just destroying and running amok on Lone Star that night. But no, they weren't. It was 14-14. They just Julian Lair had just connected with Marvin Mims on a big touchdown to tie it up at 14. And then I was already, me, myself, and other people in the press box, we were anticipating overtime. They were near midfield. It's nothing's going to happen. A miracle's not going to happen. And what do you know? The good old hook and ladder throws it to Keith Miller across the middle, and I see Miles Price coming around the backside, and he flips it to him, and I'm like, no, there's no way. There's just too much going on. He was still at like the 40-yard line, or at least that's what it appeared to, because he couldn't really tell exactly where it was. And then he just takes it down the near sideline, just keeps on going, and then what made it even better, the Colony radio crew was at Toyota Stadium, so everyone was in the press box there together. And you can hear in my video the Colony radio crew just going absolutely berserk. And it just made it even better. I mean, it was an ultra homer call, a super duper homer call, but he's
Miles Price.
Yeah, it was something like that. I'm sure y'all heard it. And then he almost even like kept running all the way to like the end of where
because you don't know where the end zone actually is.
And everyone starts storming the field. Actually, there was like 4 seconds left, technically. And they started storming the field, and then they had to get them back onto the sidelines. And then I go talk to Coach Rangel. Coach Rangel is one of the nicest coaches.
Shout out to Rudy. That's the guy.
He is so nice. I think he remember when I brought up the stuff about R.J. Hampton not getting district MVP, and I was kind of calling out some coaches. So this is a Rudy Rangel story. When I was calling out coaches on Twitter, what is 858 doing, this and that? And then Rangel told JT, a few days later when they saw him in person, he's like, hey, your guy Bryan Murphy, man, he's bashing my coaches. I don't like that. And I was like, oh no, Rangel doesn't like me. And so I actually saw him at the Little Elm, the Colony softball playoff series. He saw me from afar, and he goes, and he just waved, super nice. I was like, okay, he doesn't hate me. We're good. But yeah, after that game, he told me, that was a design thing. They actually practiced the hook and ladder Bronco, designed kind of, to resemble a little bit when Boise State beat your Sooners in the hey, yeah. I mean,
he takes it back to
it really is, and it's nicknamed Bronco. Like I said, it wasn't just some fluke thing that they've never really worked on or they've talked about a couple times.
It's the most famous hook and ladder play in the history of football.
And they might have perfected it with that play against Lone Star to win 21-14, and then they go on to win the district title.
There you go, man. That is a look at least at some of our selections for best game in the 7th edition of the Varsitys. We'll be off the rest of the week because Thursday is a holiday, of course. So everybody, you enjoy the rest of your week. Stay safe on the holiday. We'll be back on Monday for, I guess, another edition of these Varsitys podcasts where we talk about our selections for another of the awards that we'll be giving out throughout the month of July. Folks, appreciate y'all checking this out. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we will talk to y'all later.